Well, I want to welcome everybody again to our virtual version of Interphex Live. It's ongoing, and we've made a point of assuring that every topic that we've picked up on over the years is brought to bear, and more importantly, that we get them out there. I think one of the things that we have watched grow is the utilization of artificial intelligence and virtual reality, and it's gone from something we talk about to something which has become a go-to tool. And thanks to the kindness of Angelo Stracquatanio, who was a co-founder and the CEO over at Preapprentice, who's been with us several times here in Interphex Live and now on the virtual version. We're going to go over where it is, and based on that, let's get right in. Just to give you some background, Preapprentice, the company, is probably the only regulatory compliant intelligence software platform out there. It's they built for the life sciences. He has all the right terms. I mean, he and I talk many times. It's speed to market, it's parameters, it's assurance of the development forum, the whole thing. So having said all of that, let's talk about it here, Angelo. So what are the factors that we're looking at here to contributing to the growing adoption of AI in the pharmaceutical industry? Obviously, we've talked about this a couple of years. The facts are here. I mean, it's growing. Why don't we talk about some of those factors for a bit? Give our audience some background.
So first off, happy to be here, and sad that we couldn't do Interphex live in New York this year, but excited to talk to the audience because it's a show that's near and dear to us because we're located here in Jersey City, New Jersey, and every year it's a show that we really greatly look forward to because I think the attendees and the industry are really involved and engaged in trying to really evolve the overall industry to ensure that drugs get out to the patients that need them at the rate in which we're all hoping to get them to. And this whole COVID experience, I think, has shined a light on everything that this industry does in terms of its impact, its vast impact, its powerful impact, and its necessary impact for patients all around the world. And so, in a way, it's sad that at Interphex it didn't happen this year, but at the same time, I think it's really highlighted what this industry has done and what this industry works for on a day in and day out basis and what we're all fighting for. Because to answer that question around, what has really led to these changes and adoption within the life sciences industry towards AI and other types of emerging technologies, to take a step back, we really believe that it's due to a broader trend that's happening within life sciences where the actual drug product itself, the actual molecule, is becoming more sophisticated. We went from oral and solid dose that was pretty well understood, and the manufacturing process, of course, became more sophisticated in terms of automation. But then we moved towards biologics, which was in the early days a very complex process, a very complex manufacturing process, and one that required a great deal of both data and ensuring that the process is being followed correctly and being performed the first time, the right time, every time, with high reliability and uniformity. And now we're moving into cell and gene therapy, which is seeing its own set of new challenges that are being developed, whereas the complexity of what organizations are trying to produce is in lockstep trying to use new technologies to ensure the reliability and delivery of that technology, of that molecule. And so what's really fascinating is that the overall structural shifts within the industry itself have led to the opportunity to use these new emerging technologies to meet the challenges presented by the new products that are coming to market. And it's really fascinating because as you look at the portfolio within a lot of these life science organizations, we've seen a massive shift in the overall portfolio construction where, really heavily in the past it was oral and solid dose to having a majority being biologics, but now there's so much now being focused on cell and gene that in order to really meet these shifting market demands, in order to really meet the needs of this changing way in which organizations both research, go to clinical trials and deliver a commercial product, new technologies, new software, new ways in which the actual execution of that process needed to be built. And that's really where Apprentice was born. That's really where over the last 6 years we've cut our teeth, is using these new and emerging technologies to provide a solution to meet the shifting market demands. And COVID is a very powerful example of all of this, but to meet these shifting market demands at a moment's notice, to increase your speed to market, improve your overall yield per batch, and decrease the number of human-based deviations that go into the actual execution, so that you can ensure a reliable and uniform batch gets out the door the first time, every time. Because as the industry goes through these changes, it's incredibly important that the yield is managed correctly, that the speed is greatly improved, and that overall it can get to patients in a safe way that can really, frankly, in our opinion here at Apprentice, really be done only with this type of technology. Because it's not just the AI, it's not just taking the data and making a prediction, it's not just taking the data and using it to make a recommendation during the process, but it's about leveraging a suite of technologies that all together work in concert to ensure that a batch can get out the door faster with more reliability, to deliver on the dreams of what this whole industry is racing towards, both today and into the future.
It's interesting, Angelo. I mean, you bring up cell and gene, and I have to tell you, being in the industry as long as we have been, we start to see, it doesn't surprise me that AI and you're in Apprentice and the AR are being used in cell and gene. I mean, we found things for cell and gene, not we found, but there was several panels already. And there's critical pieces of the process that we never even considered as an industry, and that now we have to control, now we have to monitor, and I could see how Apprentice's sweet spot is really enhanced there. Having said that, I mean, how can AI and AR improve formulation, product performance, and predictions? I mean, we've said, we have to measure and monitor things that we never did before in cell and gene, all right? So what are the practical applications here? Why don't we get into some of the nuts and bolts on this?
Yeah, absolutely. And so what we've seen, there are two principal areas in which this technology can really empower organizations as they're going through the execution of their process. One is, and COVID has really shined a light on this, collaboration. So it's not necessarily a specific component of the process for formulation, product development, or cell and gene, but it actually is a critical piece of this chain that has been often overlooked. Because what we've seen how collaboration typically happens pre-apprentice is the most sophisticated form of collaboration is the radio, where somebody's on a radio in the manufacturing suite and is talking to somebody either within the facility or back at their cube. And that mode of collaboration has created such a pinch point in how these organizations scale and leverage subject matter expertise, vendors, colleagues, experts around the world. And of course, COVID, this is a really major issue when people can't travel out to the physical sites. You even have the sites themselves that have distributed teams now where there's only a small portion of their team in the physical manufacturing area. But if you were to attack just this small piece of the process, it's something that we've seen where then it decreases the troubleshooting times, it decreases the cycle times for when you need that subject matter expertise in a specific area, it decreases the complexity with things like tech transfer, FAT, SAT, working with CROs and CMOs, dealing with everything from the actual troubleshooting process up through working with a vendor. So when you can actually make that process, that part of the collaboration smart, you then all of a sudden can create and reduce the friction in the overall process itself, because now you bring this level of knowledge share, this level of collective intelligence that is not the computer kind, the actual human kind, directly to the point in which somebody's actually executing. So if you can see my video today, I'm broadcasting this Interphex live from our demo and testing suite here in our office. I was able to sneak into the office, here in New Jersey. So we're here in the office secretly. But how this all works then is you leverage different types of technologies, whether it's smart glasses like I have over my left shoulder, different types of mobile devices like I have over my right shoulder. But it's really about being able to leverage these tools that were specifically designed for clean rooms, specifically designed for labs, so that this way you can interact with and collaborate with people around the world, but to do so in a way that models how manufacturing teams actually execute. So what I mean by that is these devices have been designed to work with gowns. These devices have been designed to work with your two hands. They're all voice enabled, but they filter out the background noise of a large centrifuge or anything else. And so they've been tailor-made to the environment first. They leverage voice second so that you have an easy way to interact with the actual technology. But then once you actually then interact with the technology, it's also incredibly intuitive where then you can take that radio collaboration, that point of, in the facility type of collaboration, and then share then not just your voice, but everything that you're looking at, so that you can share this, say, this view of this bioreactor with your remote colleague, and that remote colleague then can use augmented reality to point out specifically what you need to be doing to resolve an issue, to specifically guide you through a process to help you understand what to do, to perform. Even we're seeing performer verifier being distributed now where you have eyes on remotely instead of just being in the facility. And so by attacking collaboration first, you enable and reduce the friction of just daily execution, because now you're bringing people with subject matter expertise, with other types of capabilities into the conversation, whereas in the past, they were isolated from the overall event as it was happening. And then once you actually get through the collaboration component, which we have built into the system, the actual execution now, the actual process is all smart, meaning when you're going through your batch record, let's take a simple batch record, for example, we developed this whole concept of augmented batch records, where we can take that existing paper record and make it smart. So this way now, as somebody is going through her process, she can hear audio guided instructions on what to do. Think of it like Google Maps for pharma, where now they're being guided through their process with audio. They can view augmented reality technique demonstrations on how to do something. So this is really critical in process dev. This is critical in the lab. This is critical basically throughout the industry around ensuring that you use the right technique associated with your process. It's not just what to do, but it's knowing how to do it. So by leveraging different types of augmented reality so that you can show how to do something with the appropriate technique, you can greatly ensure reliable execution first time, every time. And then, but where it really starts to shine is capturing data. So the data around the process for a typical batch, there can literally be billions of data points for a single batch, especially when you're dealing with some of the IoT sensors. But what's really fascinating is that the human still has to go through his or her process, capture their process data, write down everything that's happening, and the transcription of this, the data entry of this, the data integrity of all of this is super critical. But if you can make that process easy, intuitive, and hands-free, then all of a sudden you have all of this data that's sitting there that we spent as much time on the AR and as much time on the devices and as much time on the making your procedure smart as we did then on all of the modeling and all of the prediction. Because now we can take all of that data and predict something into the future. Now, of course, you can't rely on this. When I say rely on this data, I mean you can use the data to make a decision itself. A human still has to be in the loop because of GXP requirements, but you can leverage this data to make some smart decisions on where is my batch heading, what does even my schedule look like, how do I manage my resources that go into my batch. And so it's not just the cell count that people care about nowadays, it's everything else around it. So how do I ensure that my supply chain is being met and lined up so that I can anticipate when my actual production is happening, so that I don't have waste in my raw materials or consumables. When do I perform preventative maintenance on my equipment to ensure that this way I know that I'm using the right equipment at the right time and it's going to perform the way I wanted it to. And so when you put all this together now, collaboration, which we talked about, and reliable execution, you can now have the confidence to then execute your process in everything from process development with great speed, flexibility, and reliability, to actual formulation, where now you are going through and executing your process with high confidence, and then on through into, say, cell and gene, where we went from making one batch for many people to one batch for one. And when you've gone through that shift, it's super important that the humans executing that batch do it right the first time, every time, because especially in cell and gene, you only get one shot. And so to take this data and to ensure the reliability throughout the entire chain, it's something that we've seen our customers be not just excited about, but really buy into this concept that this is truly delivering on now the promises of Pharma 4.0, and how this whole industry can connect the people to the process, to the equipment, and to ensure that you can use smart technology to ultimately get drugs out the door faster for patients around the world.
Angelo, you bring up a couple of really great points. I mean, in my career, I couldn't tell you how many times I've had to go wherever to fix a problem. That's troubleshooting. Scale up, same thing. What I'm seeing here is the assurance of compliance, the assurance of them executing the scale up. That bridge from development to scale up is something that AI is really going to do, and going to do it well. So how can these technologies maintain that compliance effort? You touched on a couple of things like Pharma 4.0. We'll get to that, but let's talk about the compliance and assuring the product scale up in that area. Okay?
Absolutely. So what's really, I think, a very powerful component of this whole system is not only does, and when I say system, I mean this whole concept. It's not just unique to Apprentice, but the whole concept of using this emerging technology to improve overall operations. But what's really fascinating is that not only does it potentially help you execute reliably the first time, every time, but more importantly, it allows you to maintain a higher level of data integrity. And there's two areas in which we've focused in on specifically to enable higher levels of data integrity, which lead to then higher levels of compliance. So the first area of which is the actual transcription of that data. So when we actually transcribe that information, typically right now you have a paper batch record and you have a second person verifying what that actual value is being recorded, and a human uses a pen to actually write it down and write it into the batch record. But the way that we've reimagined this is now the first person who's performing captures the data that they need, but it also simultaneously takes a photo and/or video of that moment in which that value was captured. So now all of a sudden you have an audit trail that is incredibly rich, and not just rich, but it actually has media associated with it, so that the verification, the inspection, and the analysis potentially after the fact is substantially more reliable. Because now if there's ever a question, if there's ever a concern about a value that's captured, your audit trail isn't just who did it at what time, but it's who did it at what time, and oh, by the way, here's an image and/or video of the moment in which it actually happened. So what's interesting is by taking that approach, you can start to shift the burden from four eyes concept, where I'm standing next to an individual, to having it be more asynchronous, where then a person can check it later versus verifying it in the moment. But what's really interesting too is that the whole concept, if you still want to have live eyes on the situation, if you combine that now with the collaboration component we just mentioned a few moments ago, well, now a person could be anywhere. They could be watching a live video feed from anywhere in the world, seeing exactly what the person is doing and verifying that the value that they're capturing is indeed what they say it is. So you can reduce the overall density footprint within the facility. And during COVID, it's very important to decrease the number of people in the facility. But now you can do so with this combination of both richer audit trails and multimedia, and the distributed nature of how a verifier can be anywhere. They don't have to physically be there. They can be watching a live feed to then sign off that the person did what they said they were doing.
I think we could actually, you bring up a great point. I think we could actually take this one step further. I mean, conceptually, formulation. In other words, it's not one guy sitting in a cubicle coming up with a process. It is, he could talk to suppliers, he could talk to components, he can talk to, what I'm saying is here is, I mean, actual reality, that concept of development and conversations about all the components and the processes, that's got to assure a high degree of accuracy and melds right into the process. So how does that, in other words, during the concept stage, I mean, you guys, you must be enabling some pretty interesting stuff here.
Yeah, and even more specifically during COVID, we're working on a number of COVID treatments and /or vaccines, because when you have a workforce and when you have knowledge that's just distributed, let's even start there. What happened back in March into April is everyone went home. And even before everyone went home, the industry stopped traveling. We noticed back in January that the industry started to stop travel to different parts of the world well before governments stopped travel. So very quickly, this industry was forced to be able to figure out, how do you still develop some new treatment, some new, in this case, literally COVID vaccine, and how do you do so in a way where your team, your subject matter experts, your suppliers, your engineers, they're all either home or they can't actually get to the point in which the process is actually being executed. So this is where we've melded both of these concepts firmly together, where you take deep collaboration during the process and the actual reliable execution of the process, and we marry them both together, so this way you can have your team be wherever you need them to be because of either travel restrictions, government restrictions, even just health restrictions. And so this way now, those teams can be collaborating together during the actual execution of the process, during clinical process development and scale up. And literally, I can't say who, unfortunately, but one of our customers used our platform through the execution and actual manufacturing of a COVID vaccine candidate, and did so in a time which I also can't share publicly, but did so at a time that was like 5x faster than what they were doing so in the past. And I don't want to say that Apprentice was the reason for it, because we weren't the only factor, but by having a technology that allowed them to see what's happening during their process, collaborate during the process in real time, and have the people who are executing the process have something that's easy and intuitive and understand what they're doing that first time, because that first batch was important, and they did so reliably and successfully. We've really now seen this shift start to happen where organizations are really turning to this technology to solve some really big problems, which we're all facing here during this global pandemic.
I think you made an excellent point here. I mean, that's, to me, it just makes sense. Actual reality and moving these things along, and cutting down time. Let's face it, just not going to work, people save an hour or 2 hours a day. All right.
Absolutely.
But here's the question. Here's a question. I'm going back to the title of the topic here is, AI, AR. So how does AI help manage resources and better represent how independent variable, all that stuff that we just talked about, the independent variables, the ingredient, all of that, how does that play into an efficient, high yield process? How do you use AI in that case?
Yep, so this is where we've built out what we're calling a predictive resource management module into our platform. This is where now all of the components of the process, we take all the data that has been fed into it based on an actual execution of your operations, and we take that data and we make predictions on everything from when you now need to order your raw materials or consumables. And this is especially important in single use, because single use, the lead times on all of this are very long. A lot of this stuff is custom. And so it's important to marry your actual resources that go into your process with the schedule of your process, and the whole then combination of all of this, where then we use this machine learning and AI to make predictions and recommendations on when do you actually need to order for your supply chain, when do you actually need to go through and manage out and schedule out your batch. All of those components that feed into it is the first piece in this puzzle, because we see that the components in the process are as important as the actual process itself, and ensuring that the whole supply chain is ready in the moment in which you need it is one of the critical pieces of the process, because ensuring that everything is there when you need it and you're reducing overall waste, it then allows you to take all the data coming off of the process, so all the actual critical process parameters, all of your CQAs, all of the actual components of the process that you're capturing, we then take all of that, feed it into our system, and then allow you to make predictions on where is this batch trending. And so when you could do those trends in real time and make predictions on it, you can better anticipate when you might run into an issue, or you can also look for opportunities to improve that overall batch as you're going through your executing your process. And so really it's at the entire chain here, where we've embedded AI in everything from collaboration to where we're using natural language processing, where we're using then AI for the supply chain, so to predict out when they need to order components, and we're using it for the actual batch execution and formulation, so that this way they can actually take all of their process parameters, feed them into our system, make predictions on all of that, and then use those predictions to make a better, more informed decision. Because ultimately, all we're really doing is arming the life science industry with the right tools to be able to make the right decisions. And if those decisions can be made with higher confidence, then ultimately we believe, and we've seen, it can lead to improvements and increases in speed to market and overall yield per batch.
You know, I think one of the things I'm hearing, Angelo, and it's pretty obvious, I mean, COVID is, and this has been a common thread through a lot of the panels, but, you know, in a lot of cases, it's actually been an enabler in certain cases. That not, you know, not that that's a great thing, but the COVID, and it sounds to me like COVID is, you know, has lit the fire for you guys. And so, you know, but let's step back a minute and let's assume that, you know, COVID, yeah, okay, fine, but let's face it, that with any luck, that we're going to be eventually getting to some sort of new normal. Having said that, so somebody's going to ask the question, so what's the return on investment here? You know, I mean, what are the keys, the easy, what's the immediate return on investment? I think we've heard the obvious, but why don't we talk about that ROI? I think that I think is important for a lot of our folks listening to the discussion today.
Absolutely. And so I'll break your question into two components, which is what does the new normal look like in our opinion, and how has that changed things, and how has that approved adoption of the technology, which will directly lead into the actual ROI that we're seeing today, that we're seeing as a result of how organizations have implemented this technology. And so to take a step back, so what's interesting is that for the last 5, almost 6 years now, we've seen the life science industry come around to the fact that they know they've needed to turn to new and emerging technologies in order to meet the challenges that the industry is currently facing. And so there is already, that trend was forming many years ago. It's not a new trend. We've talked about it at Interphex before in the past. There's been many panels on Pharma 4.0. This is not something that's wholly new. But what is new is that when COVID struck and you had all of a sudden this major disruption in the global pharma supply chain, all of a sudden all of the projects that were lined up got compressed. And then instead of having it be something that was on a 1 or 2 or 3 year timeline into the future, it needs to be deployed in the next couple of weeks, literally next couple of weeks. And so we developed this concept of a rapid deployment kit, where then organizations could very quickly deploy all this technology with confidence, but to do so very, very quickly. And so we retooled our entire software and platform to be able to do all of this, but it directly then led to a rate of adoption that we were wholly surprised with. So we have mentioned, we were joking before this recording started, that we went through 15x growth since January. And so a lot of that has been due to this compression of the projects that were already in place, where organizations were already thinking about turning to this new technology to transform their operations. But we just ended up seeing a major compression of all of this. And the reason why, and the reason what we believe here, is that organizations have realized two things. One, that of course COVID is not a snowstorm. You know, we're not going to dig out and get to our cars on Tuesday and get back to work. That's not happening. You know, we will be out of this. There will be an end to this, and the life science industry will be the solution to all of this. It goes right through our industry to get us out of this mess, which is really incredible. But the second thing, though, is that COVID has really shined a light that existing systems and existing processes aren't cutting it, not just through COVID, but through the entire kind of buildup of all of this over the last couple decades, really. And so by taking a mirror essentially up to the industry and focusing all the light on what's going on, organizations and our customers have said, you know, what the way we've been doing things for so long isn't cutting it anymore, not just because of COVID, but really these are problems we knew existed. These are problems we knew we had, and we knew we needed to change them. COVID, though, was just that turning point to force that change. And what's interesting, though, that we're seeing is once that shift happened, once that mindset change happened of, okay, now it's time to actually make the change, that's when then organizations implemented this at an incredibly fast rate, which directly then led to the ROI. So when we get now to the ROI, so now we have organizations that, you know, over the last 6 months now have deployed this at a rate that is just unbelievably blisteringly fast. Now we have organizations who have had a positive ROI first on the easiest part of just setup. Because a typical pharma system, and specifically within manufacturing, like a typical MES, is a 3 to 5 year implementation cycle. You first go through a harmonization, then you go through a process of throwing out your paper records and starting them from scratch. I mean, it is a major multi-year type of process. And we instead built a component of our system where we can leverage existing paper SOPs, batch records, analytical methods, etc., and we very quickly make them smart. So we developed this whole concept of augmented procedures, where instead of being a 3 to 5 year cycle, it's a 3 to 5 week cycle to get one of your initial procedures deployed, one of your initial projects up and running, so that you can get started immediately and right away. So the ROI savings on system deployment is just tremendous. The speed in which you can then adopt this is lopsided. It's not even like 20%, 30%. It's multiples versus how it was in the past. But then when you're actually executing now, there are two areas where we've seen really high ROI. The first is obvious, which we already talked about, which is collaboration. You're stopping travel budgets. You're stopping the actual spend related to the actual physical travel of human beings. But you're also decreasing the troubleshooting time and the cycles between those moments, so that the time to resolution is then greatly, drastically reduced. So this way, then you can ensure that the process is being executed on at a faster rate. But really where we're seeing the highest ROI is the reliable training cycles, the reliable execution cycles, and taking that data that comes at the end after you execute your batch and using it to improve your batch to batch yield, as well as decreasing the time between batches. So this way you can compress the number of batches you have in a given year to ultimately try to get more out the door for that single facility that you have. And so from an ROI standpoint, we're seeing it at all different parts of the process. And so that's why it's been very transformative to our customers, because of just how drastic a solution like this and a technology like this could actually be.
Well, let me ask you a simple question. I mean, SOPs and procedures, and they go through multiple layers of review. I mean, that's all part of it. So let me just ask you, I mean, so I got an SOP about cleaning a mixer, cleaning a reactor, cleaning, you know, the pump, whatever. So how do I turn it into smart and get it done in 3 weeks to 5 weeks? How's that happen? I mean,
Yep.
without giving away the farm there, Angelo. Go ahead.
100%. So what's really fascinating is that other systems say take that existing cleaning procedure, throw it out, and type it in from scratch. So if you were to take that existing paper SOP written in Microsoft Word, convert it into a PDF, you know, we've all gone through this flow together, right? Typically, they would say take that cleaning procedure, throw it out, and then type it in from scratch into some work instruction software or some MES software or something, where then the revision cycles and the review cycles are very long because you have to ensure that that procedure was written in the way that you said it was. But instead, what we do is you take that existing PDF, let's go very simple, and what you do is you highlight it in a way that we're using our software. And what this does is it automatically extracts the text, creates all these smart things around it from audio instructions. It gives you opportunities to take augmented reality technique media, and it provides out of the box ways to then capture data to fill out your form fields. So we extract all of the components from this document automatically. So now it is your document. It is nothing different. So you're using your root document that's already been approved, already been revised, and we're just then extracting the components of it and making the components smart. So then QA just has to review the extracted components. And so it then becomes like a review by exception, where then you quite simply have the components that were extracted, review them, and then approve the document thereafter for then immediate deployment into the actual process. And so by taking this approach, it is drastically different than how the industry thought about electronic systems in the past, which is take paper, throw it out. We say don't do that. We say highlight it, have our software extract it, and now all of a sudden you still have your root document that has not changed. It's still there. It just has now all of these capabilities that come with it. Does that make sense?
That is great. I mean, that is clearly a benchmark of intelligent solutions here. So do you see this stuff going on into the future? I mean, what's your sense? Give me what's the crystal ball say? What do you think?
Yeah, so what we think is going to happen is right now the industry is kind of going through this initial transformation. All right, they're going from either organizations who were still on paper to digital, but skipping over digital and moving directly into this new intelligent world of intelligent execution, intelligent collaboration, where basically every part of the process is smart in some way. You know, some parts of the process are smarter than others, but there is intelligence built into every piece of this chain. But where we see it going next is leveraging this software where then the camera that is on the devices has an understanding of the environment. So right now, we've talked a lot about the process, we've talked a lot about technique, we've talked a lot about data capture, but we haven't talked about how once these types of devices and technology are in the manufacturing suite or in the lab, we can use the actual cameras on these devices to, in real time, understand what the person's working on, where they're working on it, what equipment they're interacting with, and then automatically make real-time recommendations, real-time changes, real-time adjustments to the process. Because where we see all this going is, and that's literally why the name of the company is called Apprentice. I know it sounds corny, but I believe in this concept, where if we can truly empower the human by understanding her environment and understanding what equipment, process, components, everything that they're working on, we can then provide that level of smart information to then have the human make a decision that neither the human unassisted or the machine alone could have made. So by marrying and empowering humans and keeping them in the process, not automating them out of it completely, but empowering the human, we believe then we can really start to make the overall drug making process super smart, because now we can in real time, without even touching a piece of software, automatically field and kick up information to the end user.
Well, I tell you, that makes me really want to get back in the lab a lot more. But let me ask you this. So, you know, so has there been, with all this stuff going on, so there's been a shift in the way organizations deal with Pharma 4.0 and all the other connected systems? So what are all those factors that are going on? I mean, you know what you and I both know smart systems are great, but it has to meld with all these other systems, and that's usually where we run into it. Why don't we start with that? See what's your take?
Sure. So interestingly, the biggest area of software development that our team has been doing over the last 6 months, after we made the shift in our software so we could deploy remotely, that whole concept of the rapid deployment kits, once we got through that initial development, a lot of our development has been on integrations and connecting to existing corporate systems, because the shift that happened and the compression that we saw of timelines from where, again, these were multi-year timelines that got compressed drastically during COVID in order to help organizations meet the demands and shifts that have been happening within the marketplace to ensure literally supply chain preservation through this global pandemic. What we've seen then is that in order to deploy these systems successfully, number one, they need to be frictionless from a infrastructure perspective. So literally just plug and play, I want to turn this thing on. So our whole system was designed from the start to do so. The second component is everything around validation and how do you greatly decrease the validation cycles and time. And so we've developed this whole concept where loosely called validation as a service, where then we're providing a lot of these components to the system to our customers and using an independent third party to ride alongside us. So this way then the cycle time for the actual validation is greatly compressed. And then from there, then it's how do we actually connect to existing systems, like for example, things like OSI Soft Pi, which captures a lot of the raw sensor data, to other types of LMS systems so that we can manage and maintain the training, to other EDMS systems where we can pull in the actual documents and make them smart. This is really where it's been a key area of focus for us over the last couple of months, because now all of a sudden, not only can the system be deployed quickly in isolation, but now it can start to be connected to all the other corporate systems, which then really enhance the overall capability of the actual platform itself. And so we've been working, literally our teams were working around the clock, 7 days a week. We're working as hard as our customers are on trying to get us out of this pandemic. And again, we are obviously only assisting the people that are actually the heroes here and actually doing the work to for literally humanity here. We're just assisting them, but we are working incredibly hard to get them the data that they need to connect it to the systems that they want in order to help them make the right decisions to ensure that they get these really, truly life-saving drugs out the door to the patients who need them.
So let's say you knew how people interacted with this technology. We've talked about this for a couple of years now. So how are they interacting with the technology now? I mean, is it still the same, or is it change? I mean, you've touched on it a couple of times. So what are the biggest use cases, and how are these guys dealing with it?
Yeah, absolutely. So even since Interphex of 2019, we've changed a lot as the actual technology itself. So for example, over my left shoulder, we developed this whole concept of a smart hub. It's a way that organizations can literally install this unit into their manufacturing suite, where then they can access all of their data, they can conduct daily stand-ups, they can grab the devices, charge the devices, automatically log into the devices, all through this smart hub that we created. It's ours, it's completely proprietary. But the way in which people now interact with this has greatly changed to the point where it was in the past used for like short moments, like short bursts, episodic moments where you're using it for a small problem. It's either troubleshooting for this moment, you're either using it for a single procedure. But where it's really shifted now is it's become a daily core system that individuals are using day in and day out, where this is the core collaboration component and software that they use in the manufacturing suite. So not just wearing the headset, but literally using this as their stand-up hub, using this as the portal in which they are interacting with their colleagues. Then on the actual execution side, it's not just one procedure anymore, it's their entire batch process. So this is where then we have seen this level of adoption and use cases where it went from a nice to have, like, oh, this is nice to have to troubleshoot, this is nice to have to improve my procedures, to being an actual system that they need to have to conduct daily collaboration, to actually ensure that their teams are executing reliably, and then more importantly on the batch record side, to ensure that teams can actually execute their process and to do so from end to end, not just from use case to use case. At its core now, this is a full-blown system of record, a full-blown MES, and one that then combines with all the collaboration tools, components, et cetera, that we've talked about on today's call.
So this hub, so one is in the manufacturing suite. So where's the rest of the team? Is there a hub in every focal point? Why don't we go over that a little bit? Just so I can understand.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. So this is what we've developed internally. It's our own build. We made it so that it could be installed in clean rooms, but how it works specifically is this would be installed on a wall in a clean room environment. So it's all the stainless steel, it's 319 stainless steel, same stainless steel in the bioreactor over my other shoulder. But how it all works is the manufacturing team would literally stand in front of it. This is a tablet here where we have our own software that we've developed, where then they're physically standing in front of the unit, and then their colleagues can be anywhere in the world. They can be at home on their desktop, they could be on an iPad, in out and about, they could be on their phone somewhere else. But now the manufacturing team could literally be looking at their colleagues instead of having to deal with like bringing in a laptop into the suite, which is actually dirty and difficult to do. They instead can have this go-to physical place where then they can be collaborating with their colleagues. So it only needs to be installed in the suite, and then everyone else can use, their laptop, their phones, their iPads, whatever, to be able to collaborate with the team in the suite. But then we have it so that it automatically charges the devices. We can see the different charge levels, and you can actually log into the devices through the unit. So it makes the whole process frictionless. I literally grab a headset, then log in, I go to my point where I need to then share my view of this bioreactor, for example. I'm collaborating with them, I can go back to it, we can then be standing in front of it. And so the manufacturing team now has a greatly reduced friction point around how do then we in manufacturing collaborate with people that aren't there. They're not even in the cubes anymore, they're at home or they're somewhere else in the world. And so it really reduces a lot of the friction for how people actually collaborate within this environment.
That's phenomenal. I mean, just let's think of even when things were so-called normal.
Yeah.
Get into an aseptic environment. You're talking about 45 minutes in train, and this is the way to do it. So that is audio visual divisor, right? Yeah.
That's exactly right. Yep. And so there's a camera on it. There's a two-way audio, two-way video. So you can see your colleagues, they can see you. And again, you can literally automatically pick up the headset, unplug it, and it'll automatically then log you into the session so that you can take the headset and go to another part of the suite to then show your remote colleagues more detail. So, there's different ways in which manufacturing teams collaborate, but we've modeled it so that this way then they can do so with everything going on. Pre-COVID, huge help. Post-COVID, a critical need to have, because there's no other way to actually go about your process.
So let's talk about the bioform manufacturing. I mean, this is clearly where it's happening here? I mean, let's talk about, there's conventional, there's the old, that's the stuff we talked about, that's a lot of our industry.
Yep.
That's the solid dosage form, the parenterals, the oil, the creams, ointments, all that. There's bioform. So why don't we go over what facts or what areas are you seeing this stuff? They're grabbing and running with it. Where is it?
Yeah, so it's actually the biggest area of growth at Apprentice is in biologics, and now, interestingly, we're starting to see a lot in cell and gene. So both in commercial and clinical cell and gene therapy manufacturing, where there is again this big shift that's happening, where you have these new biotechs that are coming to market, but now they actually have to manufacture, and they have to either manufacture their clinical batches reliably, or they're actually getting to commercial scale. And at that stage, then there needs to be a solution that has the same level of sophistication as the molecule itself. And what we're seeing in both biologics and cell and gene, that there has been this level and rate of adoption towards this technology because of the sheer complexity involved in the entire process. You know, even just the number of unit operations that were performed for oral and solid dose to biologics is just, it's night and day. And so by having such a complex process and now having software that makes the process simple and allows organizations to go through it reliably, but more importantly, to take all of that data, and the management of the yield in biologics is so unbelievably critical. You know, to take all of this data to ensure reliable batch execution is really where we're seeing the most interest and deployments within our customer base. And so I would say at this stage now, probably I would say a majority of our customers are biologics, followed by oral and solid dose, followed by cell and gene. But cell and gene is a new area where we're seeing high growth because of just the way in which it's manufactured right now. It's still very manual. It is not automated yet. People are trying to automate it, but it is very manually intensive. And to go through that process and manage that batch for that one patient is incredibly critical. And so by having this software to ride along the operator as he or she, and actually it's not just one operator, multiple operators for the execution of that one batch, it's really critical that you have a level of flexibility in your software to handle the ways in which that actual batch is being created.
So how, you know, we got to kind of bring it around to kind of running a little short on time, but let me ask you, I mean, adopting quality systems, quality, you know, assurance, QA, qualities. How does this thing? How do they suck it up? I mean, how do they take it and run with it? I mean, what has been your experience there? I mean, especially with large pharma. I mean, how do you get this thing embedded into the system?
Yeah, so interestingly, we spent as much time with QA than any other group, than the actual just manufacturing group itself, because we felt that we wanted to really build in their concerns into the product from the start. We didn't want to have QA be an afterthought. Like, we didn't want to have to take this from manufacturing and jam it down their throat and say, you're using this now, whether you like it or not. We decided instead to engage QA very early on in our development process of our platform. And so we specifically designed it so that the review cycles, the way in which you see the changes that were made, the ways in which you approve different components of the process, the ways in which we automatically flag and bubble up exceptions so that it makes it very easy and intuitive for QA teams to review. We put a lot of thought into how individuals on those teams would actually be interacting with a system like this. And so by engaging them from the start, we've seen a much higher uptick in how those teams have then approached Apprentice and how they've engaged with both us and the software, because they really felt that we listened to how they do their job and how they interact with the process and the concerns that they have on how do I actually ensure the reliable execution of this process, and how do I ensure that I can reliably sign off on this process with confidence. And so we built in a number of tools into our platform, again, by engaging QA very early on in our development cycles. So this way now, the software has been designed so that QA teams can very easily manage and review procedures, manage and review by exception the actual batch records that have been executed, manage and review and sign off on the entire batch process that the actual master batch record that they're then releasing. And so in each part of the process, we've just listened to them, and it's just been a way that allowed us to then have a higher level of adoption and uptick because they felt the level of empathy that we had for how they go through their day-to-day process.
Well, we're kind of running out of time here, Angelo, but I got to say, I mean, this is a conversation we definitely have to continue on. And all I can say is let's plan on April 2021. We will be at the ever popular Crystal Palace at the Javits Center, live and in person. And we will be dealing with it then. But other than that, I want to thank everybody that watched today. And more importantly, Angelo, as always, it was a genuine pleasure. Thank you very much.
Likewise, and if we see you in April, it means our industry won. It means that the men and women that work in this industry, tirelessly working around the clock to solve this thing, won. And so I am very excited and can't wait, and we'll do whatever we can to help those folks, because ultimately, I know this industry is not on the front lines, treating the patients physically in the emergency rooms, but I really believe that we are the key to the success of getting us out of this thing. So, really, I can't wait till April, because it means we won this thing, and not Apprentice, but the industry won. And so can't wait, and I have all hope that we'll get there.
We will. And that's no question about it.
No question about it.
We're done.